Hello. Here we're going to look at while and whereas and learn to use them better in your writing. We're going to look at two fish called the Atlantic salmon and the Pacific salmon. They are both salmon, but there are differences between them. Notice that when we say the word salmon, the L is silent. So that's how we say it. We say salmon. So what are the differences between the two kinds of salmon? You might want to stop the video and look at the details more carefully. Let's compare the salmon using while and whereas to show the differences. The Atlantic salmon lives in both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, while the Pacific salmon mostly lives in the US side of the Pacific. Let's change this round. While the Atlantic salmon lives in both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific salmon mostly lives in the US side of the Pacific. Here we can see that while is in the middle position in the first sentence and at the start position in the second sentence. There is no change in meaning in the sentence. Here's another example. The Atlantic salmon returns to the sea after laying its eggs, while the Pacific salmon dies after producing eggs. Can you change it round so that while is in the start position? Here it is. While the Atlantic salmon returns to the sea after laying its eggs, the Pacific salmon dies after producing eggs. Let's have a look at another example. There is only one type of Atlantic salmon, while there are 5 types of Pacific salmon. Can you change it round so that while is in the start position? Here it is. While there is only one type of Atlantic salmon, there are 5 types of Pacific salmon. Let's have a look at another example. The Atlantic salmon is mostly farmed, while the Pacific salmon is mostly caught in the wild. Can you change it round? Here it is. While the Atlantic salmon is mostly farmed, the Pacific salmon is mostly caught in the wild. Another example. The Atlantic salmon is less expensive than other fish, while the Pacific salmon costs more than other fish. Change it round. Here it is. While the Atlantic salmon is less expensive than other fish, the Pacific salmon costs more than other fish. Let's have a look at another example. The Atlantic salmon is somewhat healthy to eat, while the Pacific salmon is very healthy to eat. Change it round. Here it is. While the Atlantic salmon is somewhat healthy to eat, the Pacific salmon is very healthy to eat. Now let's go back to the first examples that we saw, and this time we want to use whereas instead of while. The Atlantic salmon lives in both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, whereas the Pacific salmon mostly lives in the US side of the Pacific. So here we have simply changed while in the first sentence to whereas. It means the same thing. Let's have a look at another example. And we've done the same thing. We've replaced while with whereas, so the Atlantic salmon returns to the sea after laying its eggs, whereas the Pacific salmon dies after producing its eggs. Can we put whereas in the first position? Yes, we can, but it's not so usual. So while can go in the middle position and the start position, but whereas is mostly used in the middle position. Let's have a look at another example. Let's put whereas in the middle position. Here it is. There is only one type of Atlantic salmon, whereas there are 5 types of Pacific salmon. Another example. Can you replace while with whereas? Here it is. The Atlantic salmon is less expensive than other fish, whereas the Pacific salmon costs more than other fish. So what did you learn here? You learnt that while and whereas have the same meaning. We use while and whereas to connect sentences, but to show differences. We can use while at the start and the middle of a sentence. But we mostly use whereas in the middle of a sentence. Why do we need to know two words that mean and do the same thing? Well, the answer is to give variety to our writing. What you have to do next is to try to use while and whereas in your writing.